All right, so I'm going to start off by introducing myself. So hello, everyone. My name is Shannon. I am an internet career in, and I will be hosting this session with Marty Reaume. And I just want to thank you again, Marty, so much for joining me.
No problem. Happy to be here.
Amazing. So we'll go ahead and get started. So I'll let you formally introduce yourself, Marty.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Marty Reaume. Really happy to get connected to this event. I think it's a great idea and a great event. Currently, I'm an HR venture advisor. I'm a board member, but I've really spent my career as a chief people officer. For the last 15 years, I've been a chief people officer. And for the 15 years before that, I was sort of working my way through the different disciplines in HR. So I've spent my career in human resources. So that's me. Recruiting is such a huge part of this that I'm thrilled to be here and talking about this, and hopefully I can be helpful. I think the slides are okay, Shannon? We can.
Yeah, everything on my end looks good.
Good. Okay. I was telling Shannon that when I was putting this together, I ended up having way too many slides, and I didn't want to, do death by PowerPoint, but there's just so much to talk about in the recruiting or talent acquisition space. So I thought I would cut that down a little bit and just hit some highlights, and then hopefully answer more questions or questions of Shannon's and understand what you really like to know, as opposed to me, giving you 35 slides. So let's get you hired. So a little bit about me. As I mentioned, I've had a career in people operations for a little over 30 years. The first 15 years was in financial services. So in banking, insurance, securities. I was in a trading organization for 4 or 5 years as well. And then moved into technology and have been active in technology for the last 15 years. SaaS, so software as a service, consumer products, and telecommunications were the 3 companies that I spent a lot of time in. Here's my journey in tech, and you may know some of these labels, but my switch over to tech happened when I moved from an insurance company to NetSuite. And NetSuite is a little bit of a big name right now, but then it wasn't. It was a very small company. NetSuite eventually got bought by Oracle a couple of years ago. I moved on to Fitbit. I don't know if you have a Fitbit. I still wear mine. I'm a diehard Fitbit supporter. And then moved on to Twilio, a little more in the telecommunications and technology space. These other logos, Wisdom Labs is a mental health organization that I am on the board of, as well as SPS Commerce, Open Classrooms, and Umbra Health. So the last 4 logos there, I actually serve as a board member on those companies. So talent acquisition. So what do I know about talent acquisition or recruiting? So I thought I'd give you a flavor, especially in the technology realm, of what my stints at these companies look like in terms of recruiting. NetSuite, I was there for 10 years. And it was a modest start. We started with 300-ish around the world. There was an office in San Mateo. That was the head office, San Mateo, California. I was in the Toronto office. There were probably 40 people in the Toronto office. And one tiny office in the UK that had probably 15 people. We grew that from 300 to over 3,000. I think it was over 3,500 by the time I was leaving. So we started with 3 little tiny offices and ended up with 20 plus global offices around the world, including a huge office in the Philippines, which is one of my favorite offices, but all over the globe. The growth was, for my first 5 years, I'm going to say, was pretty measured. So hiring was not hyper growth, hiring a few hundred a year. By the last half of my stint there, it was a real hockey stick, and we started to hire sort of 200 plus per quarter. So you're hitting that sort of 800 to 1,000 a year. Then Oracle purchased it, and different life there. I went on to Fitbit, a shorter stint, 2.5 years. I started when there were about 300 colleagues and grew that to about 2,500 before Google purchased it. But that was in 2.5 years. So we started with 300 and we were hiring 300 to 400 people a quarter. So that was frenetic hiring. And then Twilio was kind of the same. We started 2.5 years, started with about 600 and grew that to over 3,500, but again, only in 2.5 years. Took that from 5 offices to 18 global offices. And we hit sort of 400 to 500 colleagues a quarter, and they're doing more now. So when I was at Twilio, I think the recruiting team was about 100, maybe more than that. And now my colleagues there are telling me that the recruiting team there has hit more than 200 people. So it is a definite machine at some of these companies. What does a talent acquisition team look like, especially when you're hiring for scale and hiring for growth like that? There's definitely leaders. We call them talent partners, or in the general population, they're called recruiters. Behind them and partnering with them, we have sourcers, people who are just doing sourcing. They are just drumming up talent, drumming up resumes, and trying to find good candidates to pass off to the talent partners. We also have guides or coordinators that just hopefully make the whole process for candidates a really white glove experience. And the hope is that by the time the candidate gets through the end of the process, they want the job. And whether they get the job or not, their experience is such that they say, I wish I did. That's an amazing company. Even though I didn't get the job, it's an amazing company. I'd love to work there. I always had a focus, I'm going to say a focus on diversity and inclusion. And not that there was a separate diversity and inclusion recruiting team, just that all of us were ensuring that we were hiring with a lens to diversity and inclusion for every role that we hired. Then if you get large enough, you have campus recruiting team, definitely regional and geographic recruiting teams around the world, so that your team in San Mateo is not doing recruiting all in the Philippines or India or the UK. You end up having a geographical recruiting team. And then there's also a piece which is internal recruiting and development. So actually moving people through internal mobility, and we had recruiters dedicated to that as well. But just to give you a sense of what an internal talent acquisition team could look like, and when you're going through the process, who you might be talking to. Again, just to give you a sense of what does it take to land a hire, here's some sort of, I'm going to say sort of fundamental funnel statistics. So this is what it looks like on our end. It's a little bit off for me, but it was an image that I could find that was sort of close enough. So we're looking for one offer, and if you back that up all the way down the pipe, you sort of start with 200-300 candidates that have been identified before you hit that one offer. Out of those resumes or reach outs, you might end up with 79 that you've actually contacted. You might get 22 responses from that, and out of those 22 responses, 6 people actually enter the process. My ratio is usually sort of 5 to 1. This one says 4 to 1, but whenever I'm thinking about a hire, I think that we're going to need to get at least 5 people down to that third rung on the process before we know that we're going to land somebody. This is 4, but in there somewhere, sort of 4 to 5. And then we push them on to second, third, fourth interviews, whatever the process is. And then we have our final at one offer. So if you think about that, if you're hiring, 500 people a quarter, multiply that by 300 people in a funnel, and that is a lot of resumes that people are sifting through. So just to give you a sense of what's happening on the other side. And just some tips to how do we get you hired? And some things that I was thinking of just through my career. Definitely LinkedIn is your friend. Make sure you have a profile and place a link on your resume. That is the most used tool still to date. You always need to pay attention to keywords in the job description and make sure that some of those keywords show up in your resume. And that's how you make that link and make sure that the AI or artificial intelligence, if that's being used, is picked up. Don't worry about location. If it's your dream job, the world has gone global. The world was going global before the pandemic, and it is certainly global now, which I think is an amazing thing. It's just creating opportunities. In terms of your resume, there's always a question about whether I should have a cover letter or not. I'm not going to tell you that every cover letter is read top to bottom, that your energy and the calories you put into that will probably not be completely appreciated on the other side. But I look at a cover letter and think, they took the time to write the cover letter. And then I take a look at the actual letter to see how they express themselves. Because all day long we express ourselves. Think about just writing emails. You need to be clear, concise. You need the other person, the reader, to really understand what you're talking about. And it's a good insight into that. So my short answer is I would recommend putting effort into a cover letter. Doesn't mean that you won't get the job if you don't have one, but it's an extra step, and it signals that you've put some effort into this. And then we get a chance to sample your communication style, written communication style. The one-pager resume is always a wonderful thing. I go back to that funnel and think about, 15,000 resumes that people are looking at. It doesn't have to be one page, but it definitely shouldn't be more than two. So somewhere in between there, if you get past two, I can guarantee you nobody's looking at the rest of it. So I've had a 30-year career, and mine fits on 2 pages. So think about that and make it easy for the recruiter to really understand what you bring to the organization or could bring to the organization. One of the things to think about is, put your degree up at the top. I tend to see a lot of resumes where you sort of get to that peripheral information at the end. But if you've got a degree that signals you are perfect for this role, put it at the top. That's the first thing the recruiter is going to see. Put your degree at the top. Any awards or recognition that you have gained, put that at the top. It's always great to have a statement. What can you actually offer this company? Why would we pick you? And if you make that clear and concise, then in a matter of seconds, we have your schooling, we have your achievements, and we have your thoughts on why you would be a good candidate for this role. Of course, don't forget to highlight any languages, some projects, especially depending on where you are in your career stream. You may have had summer positions. If this is your first position, you may have worked on projects, internships, that sort of thing. They are great to highlight, and especially the outcome of those things, the results, like what did you actually do or do for a company. Of course, when you get a little further on, you've got experience of your former positions that you highlight. Don't put in high school information if you completed post-secondary education. Just leave it at that, any post-secondary education. And always make sure that you're using ownership and action words. Use words like comprehensive, I led, I managed. You want to talk about impact and the key results of what you did for the organization or the project or whatever you were working on. I also thought of some good questions to ask as an interviewee. You want to be able to set yourself apart from the other interviewee, the other candidates. One thing I always suggest is always have a resume handy, just in case. You never know. You can do a QR code on your phone and keep that handy. You can, send an email to yourself in draft and always have it handy. You never know what you're going to get on the other end. I've been in the human capital space for a long time, and especially in the startup world, it's not particularly organized all the time. Sometimes it's a little bit messy. Sometimes people are, jack of all trades and running around. And, what I'm trying to say is they might not always show up perfectly organized, ready to go with a resume. So make it easy. Just in case, make it easy. It's always great for an interview to actually just be a conversation, not an interview, but you want to have a conversation with the person. And it's wonderful when the interviewee signals that and makes that the first sign of a conversation. You can ask the first question. You can say, "Hey, it seems like you're having a really busy day. Are you seeing lots of candidates? Do you have lots of job openings?" Whatever you want to do to sort of start the conversation. It doesn't always have to be sort of a very stilted interview process. Look for little micro moments to insert the questions again, so that it is to insert your questions, so that it is a flow back and forth, and not sort of the interviewer asking you questions, you answer, go back to a question from the interviewer. So look for those little moments to slip in your questions, and it becomes much more conversational. Great one to ask the interviewer is, why did they join the company? They probably had a number of different opportunities and directions to go in. So it's always nice to know their story. And one of the things I always look for is if you've got a newer member of the team that's interviewing you, maybe it's not the first interview, but somewhere down the pipe, ask them, what is some information or advice that you would share with somebody that was starting that you wish you knew when you started? So basically, what did you learn once you joined that you wish you knew through the interview process? Good, bad, neutral, but just something that why not learn from their experience? And that's always a helpful question. And people are very happy to answer those kinds of questions. One thing that people always talk about is culture, and what does it actually mean? How do you describe the culture? What qualities define a successful team member at whatever company, at X company? What have you seen in terms of who's successful? And when situations haven't worked out, is there a theme? Is there a reason? Sometimes it can be a number of things, but have you seen something where there's multiple cases of somebody or a personality type or a methodology of working that just doesn't work in this company? And I'd love to learn what that is. Always ask, how are you measuring success in this role? I think lots of those questions are sort of, what does success look like? But what you really want to get at is, how are you going to be measured? If the person started this position, that's a great thing to know. What am I actually going to be measured by? Not what does success look like, but how am I going to be measured? How can this role help the team be more effective? Great question to ask. You're thinking outside of you and the individual role, but more about the team and how this role interacts and interplays with the team. How does the team collaborate and provide feedback for real-time growth? And that's sort of a roundabout way of asking, how am I going to learn? How am I going to get feedback and learn, good or bad, what I should be doing to improve? So what does that look like? What does that cycle of collaboration and feedback look like at this company? And then the last one I thought of was always follow up. It's amazing. I don't know if it's manners or the people that take the time to write a really nice thank you for your time and note after you've had an interview. What we do with those on the inside in an HR team? We send them to each other. We send them to the hiring manager and say, wow, look at this. This is a great email or follow-up from this. What did you think of this candidate? Blah, blah, blah. But don't think that those go unnoticed. I always answer them. I always thank the person for sending them to me, but that is a strong signal. And it probably takes 3 minutes to do that. So again, it's sort of like the cover letter and the follow-up. I just don't think you can go wrong with putting some energy into those things. I thought I would highlight this one. This is the one I get asked often and lots of times by my daughter. The dreaded salary question. What will it take for you to make a move or join? And hopefully you're seeing in the marketplace a trend where people are not asking you what you make. It's irrelevant what you make right now. You're talking about this role. the skill sets that are needed for the role that you're interviewing for. It doesn't matter what you make right now. And in many states, that it's illegal to ask that question. And I'm very glad it is illegal to ask that question. And I sort of counseled my teams to never ask that question, regardless of whether it's legal or illegal. It's irrelevant. So I don't need to know what they're making right now. I need to know what will it take for them to think about making a move if they're currently employed, or joining if you're coming out of school or not employed right now. And one of the ways to think about this, if you flip to the candidate's point of view, is this is a role that I'm sure somebody on the inside has pegged to market. There might be a salary scale, there might be a salary range, there's internal equity, there's external equity. So just wanting to be fairly compensated within the work that has been done on the inside. So things like, I'm very interested in the role. I'd like to be compensated fairly for my skills. That absolutely makes sense. I would ask, do you have a defined salary range for this role that you can share with me? If that's a no, or they stumble around with that, then you sort of have to rely on the work that you've done. In my research, I found that the market rate for this role is between this and this. And there's lots of places that you can research that. You can certainly reach out to people. Sites like salary.com are a good place to start. So there's lots of information on the internet. But if you can get sort of a range or a level out of the interviewer, and then decide, if your market research found that that's appropriate, if you would feel fairly compensated within that range, at least you have a marker to start with, rather than giving up a number and never knowing if, I should have said this, I should have said that. I think a lot of recruiters try to get the first number out of the candidate first. And it's a game of negotiation. But if you sort of follow this and say, tell me about your internal ranges, then I'm just looking to be fairly compensated for my skills. It puts the leverage back in your hands a little bit, which I think is important as a candidate. One of the things I thought was maybe a little bit interesting is just the negotiating of an offer. And when do you have the strongest leverage? And it might not be as apparent as you think. So if you get an offer sort of 1 to 3 business days after your interview, 1 to 3 business days after you've met somebody, you've got sort of medium to high leverage. They're interested in you. You're probably the first candidate. So you have some leverage there. They are interested in you, and you can start negotiating. If you get an exploding offer, which is sort of 2 to 3 days later, same situation, but in the offer somewhere it says, we need an answer by, and it's usually 2 to 3 days later, you have medium to low negotiating power. That usually signals that the company has a few people that they could make this offer to, and they're going through the list. So they give you a short window to say yes or no, because they want to keep all the rest of the pool warm. They don't want them getting offers and not having access to them. So that would be a signal to me that, of course, they're interested in you, but they have a roster. So you need to make up your mind quickly. And if you get an offer a couple of weeks after your last interview, you actually have high negotiating power. That's because you may not have been the first candidate, which is fine. It's absolutely fine not to be the top candidate. You never know what happens. Maybe they were more experienced, and that's fine. Maybe something happened. They took another offer, whatever it is. But now the company has been through one person at least, maybe a couple of others, and they don't want to do it again. They don't want to lose another person. So you actually have pretty strong negotiating power. So I just wanted you to think of that, like, in terms of what's happening on the inside and what some of these things could signal when you're trying to negotiate an offer. terms of resources, as I said, LinkedIn should be your best friend. There's a great document that they published, LinkedIn's 2021 Grad's Guide to Getting Hired. But, you can certainly use it beyond a grad. Has a ton of information, industries with most entry-level roles, fast-growing entry-level roles, fastest-growing remote roles for entry-level roles, and it's completely free. And you can just put it in the search bar in LinkedIn and you'll find it. There's a great resume assistant in Microsoft Word. And don't forget that Microsoft owns LinkedIn. So all of that information is connected. And if you go into review in Microsoft Word and all the way to the right-hand side, you get to resume assistant. And you can type in any position you want in there and it'll pull up examples of resumes. And I'm not sure that enough people use that. Indeed is pretty universal. You should also look for geographically specific job boards. Sometimes Indeed isn't the job board of choice in whatever country. So there's always some that are pretty geographically specific. Alumni forums and associations are great places. Of course, networking. And social media, I'm sure you're all well aware, but they're using every angle of social media to try and find talent. And one of the emerging ones in the last year or so, year and a half, is definitely TikTok. There's some wonderful channels on TikTok about resume writing, interview processes. One of the people that I would urge you to follow is Steve Cadigan. He used to be the head of recruiting at LinkedIn, and he now has a channel on there with some great advice. But I'm sure you can find many more as well. And of course, Facebook. It's definitely a candidate's market. So if you're looking for a job right now, how exciting. There's definitely more demand and less supply at this point in our cycle, just our economic and environmental cycle. There aren't enough candidates. So this is really, really exciting. So it's a candidates market. It's over to you to sort of, I hope, sort through the offers that you would get. And what an exciting time to be looking for employment. So I wish you luck, but I'm happy to take any questions as well that you may have, or Shannon, that you have, but I'll stop sharing so I can see people.
Yeah. Well, I have plenty of questions. I want to go redo my resume right now. I don't see any by the audience just yet. So if it's okay, I'll start with mine. So I just have, I guess, some personal questions that I had made note of. So I noticed that you're one of the top 50 of women in tech. So, and you also pursued some campaigns such as like the Michelle Obama, like Let Girls Learn. So I just wanted to know if there's something that kind of drove you to those, if there's like a correlation being like a woman in technology, if that's kind of what leads you to these education for girls kind of campaigns.
Yeah, I've been in technology, as I mentioned, for the last 15 years. And I don't think diversity is a progressive idea, or we should have a team devoted to diversity. I just think we're past that. You need diversity in a company to have a very successful company. So I don't think of it as that would be nice to do. I think of it as it's necessary. Of course, we need diversity. And trying to build engineering teams. I gave you some of the numbers that we were working with, like hundreds of positions a quarter. And I'd look on the floor at our engineering folks and, predominantly males. That's just, how it is. You look at the statistics of the graduates coming out of computer science degrees, they're males. I asked my CEO and CTO at Fitbit, and when they came out of their computer science degrees at some very good schools, I asked them, and they said, "Well, I had one female in my class." So how are we going to fix this? So I was very, very drawn to programs, and I still am. I'm very much involved in trying to encourage women, young women, to think about a career in one of the STEM areas, and in particular engineering.
Yeah.
But really think about that. And I was just, I was in the right place in the right time. And I met an ambassador to UNESCO, and she brought me along. I told her my story at Fitbit, and I will tell you this story. But if you have a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, that's a Fitbit. But we looked at our demographics, and 70% of the buyers of Fitbit were women. Yet there were these clunky smartwatches, and I actually wonderful smartwatches. I put it on my arm. I don't know if you can see my arm, but very thin. And this watch just fell off. Like, it just didn't look right on my arm. Like, 70% of our consumers are females. So we hired female mechanical engineers, and lo and behold, the world changed.
Wow.
I don't know if you followed Fitbit, but we ended up with pendants with a little pebble in it so that you didn't have to wear it here. You could wear it as a necklace. That looked wonderful. And we partnered with Tory Burch to do those things. We had little slender bracelets, and just made it much more appealing to both genders. But doing those things because we had wonderful female mechanical engineers who said, hey, how about this? And it's amazing what you can do when you, again, diversify your workforce. So that's just one little story. I was telling that story to the ambassador, and she said, I need you to come with me. So I was able to be part of this. And just as an overview, the culmination was bringing in young women, 13 to 16, from I'm going to say second and third world situations. And we brought them to France for a day, and we cycled them through a number of different, they were kind of like mini projects almost. So for instance, they came to our booth and I brought a couple of engineers with me, and they designed a smartwatch. And they went over to Microsoft booth, and they did something with the game Tetris. I don't remember what. They went over to another booth, and they worked with a solar company. And they actually built solar panels that were installed in a home the next day. So we had this whole sort of mini science fair going on with these young women. And at the end of the day, we asked them what they thought about this. And, overwhelmingly, the responses were, wow, I didn't know that STEM was that diverse. I didn't know that computer science was not just sitting in front of a computer coding. And that was the whole purpose, to say, this is your world when you go into STEM as an area of study. It's not just coding. So that, for me, listening to them at the end of the day, saying their eyes just completely opened. And you have to catch people that young. You have to catch them when they're 13, before they've gone through high school and they've got all of their tracks that they're on, but to try and open their eyes to different areas, even with, a computer science degree, but that doesn't mean you're coding. So I was really, really privileged and happy to be part of that.
Yeah, that's amazing. As like a woman in tech, did you feel like you had to maybe face some additional challenge, or have any kind of areas where you felt like maybe you had to work a little bit harder?
I don't think so. I'm going to, be completely honest. I'm in human resources in tech. And if you're going to stereotype, lots of females are in human resources. So I did find a little bit that when I was coming up, that there were lots of women in human resources, but the senior person, the CPO, the senior vice president, was a man, was male. I found that coming up, I think that has changed significantly.
Yeah.
So I feel like I was afforded wonderful opportunities, and it was up to me to take them and work hard. Now, where I did find things a little bit different was when I got to the executive level and joining executive teams. And my first executive team was 9 males and me. And that's just an interesting dynamic to try and sort of sort through that. It helped me a lot. I had to get very vocal. I had to learn how to, make my point and cut through a lot of, really, really intelligent, articulate, bright individuals. But you have to sort of figure out how to maneuver through there and make sure that you're heard as well. But I'd say that that was a challenge for many years. I'm hoping my last executive teams were much more balanced. But when I started, it was basically men and me.
Yeah. With HR, like, did you always plan to be in HR, or did you kind of fall into it, or?
No, I was setting out to be a CPA. I thought I was going to be an accountant. And so I started my BCom at U of T. But it's just sort of a family thing. It's, I'm a Reaume. That's what Reaumes do. You go and get a Bachelor of Commerce. So my father was a CPA, my sister, my brother, my sister's husband, like it's just what you do as a Reaume. So I was doing that.
Yeah.
But I finished my first year at U of T, and I remember coming home for the summer and saying to my dad, I kind of get where this is going, a little bit, but where do the people come in? Where do we actually deal with, the psychology of the people coming in? And he sort of looked at me and said, I think you're in the wrong program. And it was after my first year, and I'm so glad I did. I changed in my second year and did an honors Bachelor of Labor Management and studied the people side and the employment side, and then carried that on and did 2 more degrees in human resources, and then finally in organizational psychology, because that's what I was really interested in.
Yeah, and then I also noted that you did I think it was the psychometrics workplaces, and did you find that kind of was a very useful kind of tool?
I did. Yeah. Thank you for asking about that. I still use those today. So I started learning about them in 2000, I think.
Yeah.
Loved it. Went and did my master's because I was so interested in organizational psychology and the use of psychometrics, and then started implementing them in companies, or sort of, deciding if we should implement them. It's not sort of here, you need to do that. You have to decide in your organization if it makes sense. But when we were building NetSuite, it was at the time where there was sort of on-premise software, and you would go to a company and say, here's our product, and you would show them, and there were discs or whatever. But NetSuite was sort of at the forefront of SaaS, which is software as a service, and it's in the cloud, and nobody knew what a cloud was, and nobody trusted a cloud. And you didn't have people going to offices and selling, because there was not, they were doing this over the phone. So that was a very different skill set. You didn't have salespeople in cars driving around and selling things. You had people behind phones selling a product that nobody could see, touch, feel, because it was in the cloud. Very different skill set. I'm like, how are we going to figure out who's going to be successful at this? So that was the sort of the impetus for me to like try and figure out. You always want to decrease the number of bad hires or mishires that you have. But for me, it was also like, how do we figure out what skill set is really going to match this change in right now I was dealing with sales, but and we started to use psychometric assessments as part of the interview process. And it was amazing to me. You could sort of look at your sales force and run them all through the psychometric assessments and go, okay, those ones are stars. Let's take a look at their profiles. And then those ones are really struggling. Let's take a look at their profiles. And lo and behold, they didn't match. And these people had better profiles for something else. And we often redeployed them. Sometimes you redeploy to another company and you work through that. But it really helped us try and get the right skill sets that come naturally to people. That's what you want. You want skill sets that come naturally to people. And then when they're doing their job, it doesn't feel like a job. They're doing what comes naturally to them, and they're exponentially better at it.
Yeah.
But when you ask somebody to wake up every day and do something that doesn't come naturally to them, it takes a lot of energy, and eventually it doesn't work out. You can do it for a little bit of time, but you can't do it for a long time. But psychometrics for me was the tool that helped with that shift and turning point. So I then used it for a decade at NetSuite, and it was amazing for not just sales, but across the organization, and have since brought it into other companies as well.
Yeah, when I remember I was reading through your bio, I hadn't even heard of psychometrics, so I was like, it's something I need to learn about. For HR, do you feel like, I know you talked about people, kind of the cultural fit and like personal development. Is that like the most fulfilling part, do you think, as a recruiter, is kind of getting the right candidate and watching them grow? Or is there something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've recently been even rethinking that a little bit. Because normally what happens is you're the recruiters of their candidate's first friend at the company, right? So they reach out, they start to develop a relationship, and eventually they hopefully, get hired. And then there's this typical handoff to an HR person, and the recruiter goes back to recruiting. And I always try to get my team, especially the recruiters, to keep that relationship. Like, you are the first friend. Watch them. You know their skill set. When you have another role open in the company, you know who you brought in. You know their skill set. You watch them in the company. See if this open role might be for them, like for someone we have internally, and we're just not paying attention to it. So always, keep track of the people that you brought into the company and where they go and what they were interested in. And that really helps with internal mobility. And I always wanted people to be thinking about not just going out and getting another candidate, but have any of your colleagues hired somebody, and some manager somewhere is just not thinking about this? But we can think about that. We can think about, let's hire internally from our pool. So I love having that relationship extend a little bit. And I always push my talent partners to keep that relationship going, because you're the first buddy.
Yeah, so I guess that almost leads to another question I was going to ask you. So I guess for yourself personally, when there is an opening, you tend to kind of try and hire within first, or do you kind of look externally depending on the job, or is there like a set method, I guess we'll call it, to it?
I think it depends on the size of the company. I think it depends on some environmental factors. If you're in a big company, absolutely, you should be like here, like you've got a pool right there. So why not? Why would you not encourage development and change? And I used to say to my team and to teams we were supporting, we're here to have you develop your LinkedIn profile. I want you to beef up that profile while you're here. I want you to learn more skills, and not because I want recruiters coming after them or because I want them to post their LinkedIn profile to get another job. I know that if they're continuing to learn, the longer they learn, the longer they're going to stay with us. When you sort of hit that plateau, you don't feel like you're learning anymore, you don't feel like you have opportunities, that's when you start to lift your head and answer those recruiting calls. So internal mobility, I think, is really, really important. However, depends on the size of the company. If you've got a little, 10-person company, it's probably not going to happen. Sub 100, it's probably a little bit difficult. But when you have the right environment for that, for sure, there's no downside.
Working in HR as a recruiter, was there ever like a downside for you, or like a challenge that you had to overcome?
Oh yeah, all the time. All the time. And I would chalk it up to the war for talent. I think that was a book or, McKinsey article, both maybe, in the early 2000s. I don't think it ever ended. And especially for, I spent that time in my life in Silicon Valley. And there are not enough engineers. There are not enough product people. There are not enough. I could list it out. So we're all clamoring for talent. So I get a headcount plan that's, hey, Marty, we have to hire 500 software engineers by Thursday. Let's go. Some of those things were beyond challenging. Wow. And if you look at my resume, I was never in the, whether you call them FANG companies or the top tier companies, but I didn't work at Facebook. I didn't work at Amazon. I didn't work at Google. I didn't work at LinkedIn. I was always sort of the tier below that. So I was at NetSuite and Fitbit and Twilio. So meaning any of those top companies could outbid us on any candidate any day of the week. And then I was in tier 2 companies. Think of all the other companies, like, what are they doing? So you really had to get very, very good, and they still, we still all do, at your value proposition. Like, why would you come here and not go to Facebook, Amazon, Google, whatever, pick the company. What can we offer you? And then make it true. You can't just have a recruiter say it, but it has to reflect your internal environment and what the employee experience will be. And come here, own the project end to end. If you go to Facebook, for instance, you'll own this piece of it. Like, what would you prefer? So figuring out, how to attract the talent that is more aligned with what you have to offer them. And that's hard work. The recruiting side was always the challenge. There's lots of other challenges, but recruiting side was always a challenge.
Yeah. And then just in case the audience doesn't know about Silicon Valley, can you just kind of, again, briefly summarize the concept behind it and kind of, I guess, just shed some light?
Sure. Before I got there, I always thought of Silicon Valley as an actual valley. That's how I pictured it. But it's an area. So it's an area south of San Francisco, and it goes around San Francisco Bay. So you may hear of it, or it's referred to as the Bay Area. And a number of different little towns around there, like Fremont and Cupertino, where Apple is, San Jose, Palo Alto, those, kind of the cities that sort of surround the Bay. And it's called Silicon Valley because I'm sure there's a complete history on it, but that's where tech companies seem to be spawned from, or lots of them. So probably think of, from Tesla to LinkedIn to Facebook to Google, think of the iconic technology companies, and they're all there.
Yeah. I know. It's so funny. I always picture the great big, the valley, when I hear that word every time. And then I also had a couple questions. I just checked the chat and there wasn't any from the audience just yet. But if anyone does have a question, I definitely encourage you to type it in. But some that I had, kind of back to the external, the people looking for jobs and trying to get hired right now. I just had one that was more popular, and I got it a couple times, and it's, can I get into a tech company without being a technical person?
Oh, for sure. Me.
Yeah.
Look at me. I'm not a technical person. I'm pretty tech savvy. You kind of have to be, but I don't have a computer science degree. I'm certainly not an engineer, and there's lots of talent outside of engineering in tech companies. I mean, think of a company, right? There's legal, there's marketing, there's sales, huge sales skill set. There's implementation. So somebody sells their technology, then a team needs to implement that technology. There's a whole network of support. So it's sort of the chain is sell the technology, throw it over the wall, have teams implement that technology. And then throw it over the wall. And if you have any questions or things go awry, kind of the customer support side is that third part. And all of those are, you learn the product, you learn the technology, but you don't need a technological background to do many roles in the tech industry and companies like that. There's lots of opportunity. And we haven't even talked about product. So there's, a whole array of skill sets that are on the product side as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people feel like the world is going so tech-based, right? That you almost need to be technical, but then things like you mentioned, HR, the customer service side, you don't need to have your coding.
Nope.
Not in that. And then did you find recruiting, like I know you mentioned those big companies that you work for, like Fitbit and then the NetSuite. Was there like a common kind of component and strategy when recruiting, if that makes sense, like across tech sectors, or was each individual company had their own kind of strategy that you had to align with?
There's both. So there's commonalities in, we have to figure out the skill set that would be attracted to this company, which is different than NetSuite, different at Fitbit, different at Twilio, but you still have to sort of figure that out. So that's sort of a commonality. But then cultures are very, very different. How you work, how you act, how you interact with each other, what success looks like, how you're measured. Between all of my companies, all of that was different all the time. So then you have to sort of think about, okay, who would be really successful here, and how do we ferret that out in an interview process, or using psychometrics, or the combination of whiteboarding sessions. Sometimes there's assessments, like coding challenges and that kind of thing if you're on the engineering side. How do we figure out who will be successful in this organization? So I think there's commonalities in sort of, here's our value proposition. Does that resonate with you? Would you like to come and meet us and see if you would be successful here? But if your value proposition doesn't really resonate with somebody, then they should probably go interview at a different company. Right? So there's commonalities to how you go about it. But I do think, like, every company is so different when you actually get on the inside and you figure out how work is done, and what is expected from you, and how you interact with each other. So you have to figure out what that is, and then how to find people who will be successful in that environment.
Yeah, that's a great point. So we do have 2 questions now from our audience.
Good.
So you're going to watch me like shove my face near it trying to read it. But Don asked what your thoughts are on this comment that he sent above. There was a text limit. So I've spoken to a few recruiters who felt that after a few years of working in the industry, they felt that people would categorize them into this recruitment box, which in turn would make it difficult for them to break out of the area of HR or external. Like, what are your thoughts on this? And then, and did you ever feel that you were stuck in recruitment box within your career?
I actually didn't feel personally that I was. I mean, I've been a serial CPO, and I must say that the calls I get are constant. And not because it's Marty, they're constant because there's so many companies that are growing and need, a leader in the HR sphere. So there just isn't enough supply. So I've sort of done that to myself a little bit, but wanted to, because I'm happy here. I like doing this kind of work. But along the way, I did find really different trajectories that you could go on. Once you get in a company and people understand how you work and that they can count on you and they can trust, working with you, and you'll come through, and you're a good colleague, and, there's a level of intelligence there, and that they can tap into. Other things come up. And one of them for me was a sales role. And there's sort of, you're always selling this stuff in HR that nobody wants to do. And I get it. Nobody wants to do a lot of stuff in HR. Not the people in the team, but our customers that we serve, they're kind of rolling their eyes. They don't want to do this. And we have to sell it to them. Like, why do we need you to do this? Right. So there's sales skills there. And somebody sort of came over to me and said, look, you can sell us, you can get us to do anything. That means you can sell to customers. And that's a great example of picking up some transferable skills and going, I think she could do this. And that's my example. And that happened to me a couple of times, but that happens all the time internally. And especially in growing companies where it's more about what you can get done, how you can execute, how people can rely on you. And then boom, there's an opportunity over there. We would sit in a room and go, okay, let's put some names on a whiteboard. Who do we think can do that? And sometimes it was things that the company has never done before. So it's not like we knew what the background was. We were just looking for someone that we could trust and rely on. So getting pigeonholed, not unless you want to, and eventually in my career, I wanted to. I'm happy in this space, and I found my niche, and I'm happy there. But I don't really think that's a thing. I think there's lots of opportunities.
Yeah. And then Miriam, who is a student at Algonquin College, asked, if one does not have a long list of skills and abilities, would they stand any chance to be selected?
Sure. We don't need a long list. We just need the right list.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for something, and even if it's not dead on, like if it's transferable, right? You did this role, which kind of has nothing to do with that role, but the skills are transferable. I'll give you an example that's close to me, which was my daughter. She is a very petite young woman who's a vegetarian, and she worked for a meat company, and which doesn't make any sense right there. But she drove an enormous, I don't know, a Ford F-150 with the same size of the truck behind her, carrying barbecues, and went coast to coast in Canada and set up tents and had a team and sold their product. They cooked their product and gave out samples and that sort of thing. That was her summer job for 2 summers. She's a vegetarian, and the truck was like she had to put phone booths or phone books on the seat so that she could see over the front. She was the driver of this whole rig, and that got her a job at a hospital when she was a dietitian, because they went, wow, if you can do that, if you can maneuver all of this, lead this team, go across Canada, and they needed a dietitian to go across Canada and start opening clinics, and it was completely transferable skills. The jobs had nothing to do with each other than you could see that she had the skill set that they could use on the other side. So that was her job from before she graduated, and she had to sort of figure out how to highlight things in there that would then move her to the positions that she was looking for postgraduate. So it's not a long list. It's the right list. What have you done that doesn't have to be in the same arena, industry, anything, but what have you done that would easily transfer to what they're looking for?
Yeah, those are some great points. I'm trying to... So Dawn said, thanks for sharing your insights.
You're welcome, Dawn.
Yeah. Thank you as well. It's definitely helpful. But yeah, I think that's true, because I work for like a small business in my hometown, and I was on the phone the other day, and the woman gave me her address and had HR, and I was like, that's my major. And she was like, are you looking for a job? Like, I would love a little assistant. And it's so weird how I was talking to her for a completely different purpose, right? And then sometimes those things arise.
Oh, for sure. And then you and I were talking about this at the beginning of the call. I'm saying I love these events, and it's a little bit of a shame that they're not in person. But you never know who you're going to meet, what conversation you're going to have. I just think you have to put yourself out there, and things start to happen. People send me things through LinkedIn. I don't know who they are. I've never met them before. But hey, these are my skill set. I love your company. Is there, you might not have a role now, but could you think of me? Could you, and I just think good for you. Good for you for putting in that effort and connecting with me. And, they could be the most junior person coming out of school, and they're shooting for the C-level person. And they found me and sent an executive at this company their resume. Good for them. So those kinds of things stand out, and I work hard to try and place them.
Yeah, and I think as an undergraduate, sometimes it's intimidating to reach out and expand your network. So it's funny to hear on the other side that it's appreciated, right? And it's noticed.
Oh, it's more than noticed. It just shows so much gumption and just get to itedness, and and just sort of knowing what you're after, and then you just think, wow, if we put them on this project, then you just sort of translate it to the inside, and that's the kind of person that you're looking for, with that energy and initiative. And we're all people on the other side. Once you get to the executive level, you don't become a monster. You're a person, and we all had our careers up as well. So don't ever think that. I would bet that 9 out of 10 executives are so appreciative of that kind of initiative.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, on my end, it's timing it. So I don't know if it's going to make us say goodbye exactly within that minute, but just in case it does, I just want to thank you again so much, Marty. I appreciate your time. I learned a lot. I want to go redo my resume.
Well, you know where to find me if I can be helpful.
Yeah.
But thank you, Shannon, for reaching out. I really do think these kinds of sessions are helpful. So I was happy to be involved.
Oh, okay. I don't know if we should maybe hang back and see what happens, or maybe we'll leave it on. Do you have a last piece of kind of advice to our audience?
Probably just reiterating some of the things that we've talked about. Like, don't be shy, really think of, and don't ever think that I don't have any skills, because you do. You have skills, they're transferable. Just put some, sit down, be thoughtful about it, put some effort behind there, and think about how they transfer. And then be articulate about how they transfer, and things will start to happen.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much. I guess if that's it for questions, then we're okay to end the session.
Okay.
Just one last look. I'm seeing thank yous, but no questions. So I guess we'll end it here.
Everybody's excited about the long weekend. So have a great long weekend.
You too. Thanks again, Marty.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.